Hi everyone. So some of the first steps to creating a game in Scratch is quite literally to just imagine and lay out, not necessarily only in your head, but even on some paper, the details of your game. So what could make this Scratch starter file into a game would require some objectives. So in other words, we need a way to score, to win the game, once the score reaches a minimum threshold. And we would also need a way to lose the game. And in this case, maybe we can have some enemies or some obstacles so that if they interact or collide with the Scratch Cat, then you lose a life. So you would lose the game when your life gets down to 0. So one way or another, all games use that basic scenario to drive the function of the program. In this demonstration game, my vision is that we will have an enemy that is essentially a ball rolling left and right along the boardwalk there that the cat must avoid. So he's able to move left and right, but in order to avoid the balls, he's going to have to be able to jump. So the cat's going to need left and right movement and a jumping mechanism. In addition to that, the way that he will score points to win the game is to collect items that might be falling out of the sky. So if he touches an item, then he collects that, and it's an additional point in his score. And at all times we have to monitor the values of those two variables, score and life. And if the score exceeds a certain number, I'll say 5, that means he wins. And at the same time, if at any time during the play of the game he's down to 0 lives, then he's lost. So those are the basic mechanics really of any game. You need win strategies, a lose strategy, and then of course the actual objects and the visuals and the animations for the gameplay. Demonstrate what I envision this game to be. So I'm going to click on the green flag here, and our cat is now jumping. He's collecting the apples and he's avoiding the balls. Watch the scores going up, and I just lost a life, and I should be collecting apples as points, and I lost because I lost my last life. So one of the things that we want to do is detect when a win or a lose situation occurs and change the background. So the background is normally the boardwalk, but we have 2 other backgrounds we can use. So students, this is the starting point. When you open up your starter Scratch file for this cat game, you're right where we need to be, and we will develop this program together. So let's get started looking at the mechanics of this game. Remember, every Scratch program is like a play. And the plays have a director whose job is to tell the actors where and when to be in their locations. So that role here can be played by the stage. So let's take a quick look at the stage. There are 3 backgrounds. So I gave you the backdrops for win and lose instead of spending a lot of time making these in this video. In this starter file I just provided them. So when you trigger the lose screen by losing all your lives, we just change the backdrop, and all of a sudden you see that instead of the boardwalk. And of course when your score exceeds the minimum threshold, I think mine was 5, you changed again the backdrops to, in this case, the win screen. And that's what a pretty normal and expected view of how games proceed. You play and then you win or you lose. So we don't often think of stage as being a sprite, and therefore we don't think of the stage as having a script. But there are certain things that the director must do before the play, or in this case the game, really even starts. So let's do that. In this case, we want, when you click the green flag, we want the background to be on the play. So that will be a looks command, and we're going to make sure that we switch the background to the play background. That's the boardwalk. Because remember, the last time this program was run, it ended with one of the other screens. So if you play it again, it's still on that screen. So you, the director, have to make sure the correct background is visible. The next thing we need to do is create the variables. We can initialize all our variables here, but in this case we just need to create them first. So remember how that works. We're going to click make a variable, and the first variable is going to be called score. Click OK. And the next one we're going to need is okay. I noticed that I've already created these variables, and I even have a timer variable that we're not using. So we'll just ignore that, not a worry. So life and score already work, but remember the process for making a variable are really simple. Just type the name that you want it to be. Like I'll just say my variable test, and we'll delete it in a second. So all of a sudden, we have that variable now. If you want the variable to be visible on the screen, you just have to check its box. So make sure that the life and the score variables are visible. You can move them around and reposition them. And notice that they, by default, have an initial value of 0. Let's go delete these ones we're not using. If you just right-click on it, delete it, and we can delete the timer. All right. So 2 more things. We're going to drag in 2 set blocks because we want to not just rely on these being set to 0 automatically. In fact, we want the life variable to be set to 3. We're going to start off with 3 lives. And let's select the score variable, and we'll set that to 0. And that's it for now. We're going to come back to this then to program the control that's going to constantly monitor. Is your score greater than 5? Is your score greater than 5? And at all times it's going to be asking 2 questions. Is your life down to 0? Or is your score greater than 5? Because if either one of those is true, the game's over and we want to switch to the appropriate background. So we'll come back to that, but just to get the game going, we need to use these blocks to initialize gameplay. Let's head over to the cat sprite. He's going to have a bunch of scripts because we need to control his movement on the screen. Just like before, we're going to need to initialize the location and maybe even the size of the cat. So on an event block, when we start the program, we always want these things to happen. We want the cat to be visible, so we're going to go into looks block and drag out a show. Remember, we can hide the cat, and at the end of the game we do hide the cat because we just want to see the background that says you won without seeing the cat. So at the end of the last game we used a hide command. So to undo that, we're not going to assume that at the beginning of a new game the cat is visible. We're going to use the show block and say you are visible. Also, we want to position him correctly, so we want him to go to that XY starting position. So that's a motion block, go to, and he's actually sitting where he needs to be. So when I gave you this starter file, that's his starting position. Notice the X and Y coordinates are 0 and -90. Those were preloaded into the go to block, and just drag it in. Also, we want him to be pointing to the right, so we're going to use a point in direction block, and 90 degrees is to the right, if you remember, right? Good. And one last thing, this is an oddball thing, but it could affect the way he moves. We only want to have him rotate left and right. So I'm going to click a set rotation style, left, right. There are other choices here. We'll use that. Alright, so if we start the game right now, notice our life is set to 3 and our cat is in his starting position. It really didn't change because that's where we left off. So the next thing to do is program this cat's motion. He's going to be able to move left and right, so we're going to need a little forever block, and then we can just copy it. Let's do that. So we're going to constantly monitor in a forever block. Are you pushing the left or right arrow? So that's literally a question, and that's what these conditional blocks do. We're going to ask a question. If this thing that we're going to put in that hexagon is true, then we're going to execute all the blocks that are inside this little, what we call a C block. So remember, the if block is in the shape of a C. What's inside the C is the code that's executed only when that statement there is true. So what are we testing? We want to know if the right arrow key was pressed. Well, fortunately, there is a sensing block to detect if an arrow key was pressed. So it's this guy right here. And we're going to use the drop down, and let's program the right arrow for moving to the right. So in this block, we're just testing, did you press the right arrow? And if you did, we want to make sure you're pointing in the right direction. So let's do a looks command. Motion. Point in the right direction. If you push the right arrow, we want him to move. So let's have him move 10 steps. You can control the number of steps for each move to increase or decrease the speed. And of course, we want him to look a little different, because remember, the cat has, if you can look at his costumes, he has 2 costumes. And if you toggle back and forth between those costumes really quickly, the animation effect is that he's walking or maybe running. So all we need to do to change costumes, he only has 2, is to go into the looks block and tell him to go to the next costume, and he'll toggle to the next one back and forth. And that's it. So let's test this. If I push the right arrow key, he plods off to the right. So let's do the same thing for the left. And the beauty here, everybody, is we don't need to retype this whole thing. All we need to do is right click and duplicate this and drop it. For this copy, we're going to change it to the left arrow, and we're going to change the direction to pointing not at 90, but at the other direction to the left, which is -90. We'll still move 10 steps, still go to the next costume. Let's again take a look at what's happening here. So we position the cat, left arrow, right arrow, beautiful. Students, adjust as needed so that your cat moves the way you want him to. Students, the last step here is to program one more key. We'll use the space key to make the cat jump. So once again, in this case, we're going to not use when the green flag clicked. We're going to program when a space key is pressed. Now remember, you have your choice of key, but the space key is sort of the default starting point here. So when we see the space key, pull this up a little bit, what is it we want to do? We're going to repeat control block. We're going to repeat something 8 times. Now again, you can play with these numbers, but we're going to change the Y value by 10. So if you're jumping vertically, the X value doesn't change. We're just changing the Y value, right? So as Y goes up by 10, that means he's going up on the stage. And then we can just copy this essentially, because it's going to be the same thing going down, but we're going to change it by -10 instead. So just change that +10 to a -10, and we're going to need one more piece here. We just need to put a little tiny wait block in there. So the wait is at the top of the control. Let's just have a little tiny pause there, like a half a second. So now if we run our game with these scripts, we should see the action that we're looking for. And I'll put these scripts a little bit all in one place so you can maybe see them all together. And running the game, the most important thing is this jumping. All right, Looks great. We're going to continue this on the next video. I'll see you there.